Hence, ED is a unit element in R, which contradicts our assumption. This is the assumption we made right after concluding that if R has a unit element, then it's a division ring. After that, we assume that R does not have a unit element, and this case we are now investigating. So our supposition is wrong, and what is the supposition? We supposed that the product of any two non-zero elements is non-zero. That supposition is wrong. So our supposition that the product of any two non-zero elements in R is non-zero is wrong. That is, there exist non-zero elements A and B in R such that their product is equal to 0, and this was our claim. So we have now proved the claim. Now where can we go from here? Now we have to recall some ideals or right ideals from the previous set of exercises at the end of section 3.4. There we came across things that look like this: Ra, lambda L. So we will make use of them. Let us see how. But what do we get from this equation? Okay, this implies B belongs to Ra. Ra is something that we defined in the previous set of exercises, specifically in exercise 17, which is the set of all elements in R such that if we multiply A by those elements from the right, we get 0. See exercise 17 of section 3.4. So now B is an element in Ra because AB is equal to 0. Okay. Now in that exercise, if you recall, we proved that Ra is a right ideal of R. For any element A, this Ra is a right ideal of R. Now since Ra is a right ideal of R and B is not equal to 0, you see non-zero elements A and B. So the right ideal Ra contains a non-zero element B, so it cannot be the zero ideal. Keep in mind that the condition that our ring has only two right ideals is still there. Okay, so this particular right ideal is either the zero ideal or it is the whole ring, but it cannot be the zero ideal since it contains the non-zero element B. This we have, or we must have, Ra is equal to R. But this now has the implication that if we multiply A from the right side by any ring element, the product is 0. Okay, this is a drastic implication. So thus Ax is equal to 0 for all x belonging to R, and this in turn implies something else. This implies that A belongs to lambda of R, which is the set of those elements x in R such that xy is equal to 0 for all y belonging to R. And in this regard, see exercise 18. Of section 3.4. Okay, what did we have in this exercise? You see, the original exercise was this: R is a ring and L is a left ideal of R, and lambda L was defined to be the set of those elements x belonging to R such that x y is equal to 0 for all y belonging to L. And it was proved in this exercise that this is an ideal or a two-sided ideal. Now in our case, in place of L we have R itself, because R is an ideal of itself, so all the more so R is a left ideal of R, so we can in fact consider lambda of R, and this lambda of R is the set of those elements which when we multiply by any element of R gives us 0, and A is one such element, because multiplying A by any element of R from the right side gives us 0. So A belongs to lambda R. Okay. So now, before I wrap this up, so now what is our conclusion? Lambda R is now a two-sided ideal, but because it is a two-sided ideal, it is also a right ideal. It's right as well as left ideal. Only the fact that it's a right ideal is needed for us, because we are dealing with right ideals. Since lambda R is a right ideal of R and A belongs to A belongs to lambda R, that we have written here itself, and A is non-zero. You see, now here we used the fact that B is non-zero, but both A and B are non-zero. So now we are using the fact that A is non-zero, and since lambda R is a right ideal, it will either be the zero ideal or the whole ring. It cannot be the zero ideal because it contains the non-zero element, and A is not equal to 0. We must have lambda R is equal to R, and this equation tells us that if we multiply any two elements of the ring, we will get 0. Why? You see, when we I mean any element of lambda r, when we multiply that by any element of r, we get 0. But now lambda r itself is r, so any element of r we multiply by any other element or by itself, we get 0. So this implies x y is equal to 0 for all x and y belonging to R. So you see that one part of the claim has already been proved. We were asked to prove that either R is a division ring or R is a ring with finitely many elements in which the product of any two elements is 0. So that product being 0, that part we have already shown. Now we have to prove that the ring is finite. Okay. Now comes group theory. One exercise from group theory will now help us. Okay. Now let me take S. Let S be any subgroup of R under addition. Okay. S is any subgroup of the ring under addition because the ring is a group under its addition. Since for any S belonging to S and R belonging to R, we have SR equal to 0 because now product of any two elements is 0 and this must belong to S because S is a subgroup. It has to have the additive identity. What have we done here is see, we have multiplied any element of S by any element of R from the right hand side and the result is in S. So S is a right ideal. S is a right ideal of R. Thus, by our hypothesis, S is either equal to the 0 group or the trivial group, or S is equal to R. So that means the ring as an additive group has only two subgroups, the trivial group and the group itself. And here we can invoke one of the result of one of the exercises from group theory, which says that if a group has no non-trivial subgroup, then it must be finite with a prime number of elements. In fact, that much can also be said. So that's what we are going to conclude now. We only need the finiteness. Okay. So the group has no non-trivial subgroup. And so by exercise 3 we will see these things. Okay, when we study group theory we will prove these things. Exercise 3 of section 2.4, R is finite with this much is extra prime number of elements, but anyway we have got what we wanted. So this ends the solution. So what have we proved? You see, first of all, if there is a unit element in the ring, then the ring is a division ring by the previous exercise. Otherwise it's a ring with a finite number of elements in which product of any two elements is 0. Okay, and in fact the number of elements in the ring is prime. Okay, next we come to the third exercise. Let J be the ring of integers. P a prime number okay, and this the ideal of J consisting of all multiples of P. We have to prove two things. There are two parts. This quotient ring is isomorphic to JP, which is nothing but the ring of integers mod P. We have come across this ring. And B, using theorem we are continuing this, right? Using theorem 351 and part A of this exercise that JP is a field okay. This one is not that difficult. So first we solve part A. So what are the things given to us? We are given the ring of integers J. P is a prime number and this is the ideal generated by P, which is nothing but the set of all integer multiples of P. That is an ideal in J. Then we have to prove that this quotient ring is isomorphic to JP. Okay. So define a function phi from J into JP like this. Phi of n is defined to be equal to this, where this is the congruence class modulo P containing n. Okay, and this is a well defined map. So that means what we have done here is that we are mapping an integer n onto the congruence class modulo P containing that integer. There is precisely one congruence class which contains a given integer. Why? Because if you remember, the congruence classes modulo P, because here the modulus is P, I mean, what can I say? It is just like that equivalence relation. I mean, whatever we have gone through in the previous video, not for this one, but that that other thing, I mean, at the end of that set theory section. Once we have an equivalence relation on A, on a set A, then it decomposes A into non-empty disjoint, mutually disjoint subsets whose union is A. The same thing happens here when for this relation. Two integers being congruent to one another modulo P. This is also an equivalence relation, and it divides the set of all integers into congruence classes, disjoint. There are exactly P of them, and they are nothing but this. So any integer will belong to exactly one of them, and we are mapping an integer to the congruence class containing itself. Okay, so that's what we have done in this map. Now our aim is to first of all show that this is a ring homomorphism, which is actually pretty easy. Clearly phi is well defined. For any two integers n and m, we have phi of n plus m. By definition, this is the congruence class containing n plus m, and by the definition of addition in this ring JP, this is nothing but n plus m. So this is phi of n plus phi of m. So phi respects addition. Like that, phi respects multiplication as well. Phi of n, phi of m. Hence, phi is a homomorphism, a ring homomorphism, but since we are dealing with rings primarily, so we don't mention that. If we are in a part of mathematics where rings are not the only type of structures, then there we have to mention specifically that something is a ring homomorphism or a group homomorphism, or maybe a linear transformation between two vector spaces. So those things have to be specifically mentioned. But here it's just homomorphism means ring homomorphism. Okay, now next we also note that this is clearly onto. Why? Also, for any say let us take Q belonging to JP. You understand that this is the congruence class modulo P containing the integer q. Okay, those things are understood from this notation itself. For any this belonging to this, we have phi of q is equal to q. Hence, phi is onto or surjective. So we have proved that our homomorphism is surjective. Now next we find the kernel. Okay. Note that if I take a multiple of p, say p alpha, where alpha is any integer, then this is the congruence class modulo p containing p alpha. But since p alpha is divisible by p, so this is nothing but 0. So any multiple of p, its phi image is the additive identity in Jp. So all the multiples of p belong to the kernel of phi, and I am just going to mention this. It's easy to see that this ideal is contained in the kernel of phi. Recall that this is the notation for the kernel of a homomorphism, of a ring homomorphism. Because it becomes an ideal, I think that's why I is used. Okay. Now we have to also prove that this is contained in this. Now, so let us take an element. Say, what can we take? We can take anything. Let us take alpha itself. Alpha belongs to I of phi. Then the congruence class containing alpha is nothing but phi of alpha, but since alpha belongs to the kernel, this will be equal to 0, which implies that alpha is congruent to 0 modulo p, or the same thing, that p divides alpha. Hence, alpha belongs to the ideal generated by p. So any element in the kernel is here. This implies the kernel is also a subset of this ideal. So we can now combine this one and this one. Thus the kernel of phi is nothing but this. So we now have a homomorphism from J on to Jp with kernel p. So we can use the isomorphism theorem, and I have to refer to it properly. What is that theorem number? Okay, so hence by theorem 341, this is isomorphic to Jp. So we have actually completed the solution to part A. Now we come to part B. Using this fact, and theorem 351, which says that such a quotient is a field if and only if the ideal is maximal, we have to conclude that Jp is a field. Okay, so now since by example we have already seen two examples of maximal ideals, right? One in the ring of integers and one in the ring of real valued continuous functions on the compact unit interval. So in that example, in that first example, we have seen that the maximal ideals in the ring of integers are the ones generated by prime numbers. So this is a maximal ideal, this P, and that was example 351. This is a maximal ideal of J. Hence, by theorem 351, this quotient is a field. But since these two rings are isomorphic, so ring theoretically they are actually the same thing. So if one of them is a field, the other will also be a field. Hence, by part A, Jp is a field. We already know that Jp is a field before this exercise, but this is another way of proving this. And in fact, here we have identified Jp as a quotient ring. And now the final exercise, the fourth one. This one has 2 stars. From my experience with this book, what I have figured out is that if an exercise has only one asterisk, one star, then its solution is difficult. You need to go deep, and if you are lucky, you may come across, you may find out a solution. But if an exercise has 2 stars, then you may need to go outside of algebra itself to find something and then use it to solve the problem. Now this fourth one is one such case where we need topology, specifically compactness. Okay, so this is the statement. So this is an extremely difficult problem for someone, of course, who doesn't know the solution. Let R be okay. Let in fact this exercise will complete the search for all the maximal ideals in the ring of continuous functions. Recall that in example 352, we said that ideals like this, that is all such functions that vanish at gamma, are maximal. In this exercise, we will prove that these are the only maximal ideals. That's the thing. Okay, so let R be the ring of all real valued continuous functions on the closed unit interval, I suppose, on the closed unit interval. Okay, if M is a maximal ideal of R, prove that there exists a number gamma which lies between 0 and 1 such that M is equal to M gamma, and the definition of M gamma is this: it is the set of those functions, actually it's written as fx but I am writing f, that vanish at gamma. Okay, so this is the problem. Now for this, let me just put some more ink, I may need it. Okay, so let us see the solution. Let me also clean this part.